My daughter's husband scheduled the first showing for a Saturday morning without telling me. Not a hint, not a question. A stranger in a polo shirt rang my doorbell at 8:45 with a tape measure clipped to his belt, and when I asked who he was, he said he was the photographer and that my son-in-law had sent him. My name is Joyce Alderman. I'm 64 years old. I have lived in this house in Chandler, Arizona since 1998, which is 27 years, which is longer than my daughter has been a legal adult. My husband Frank and I bought it for $187,000. The mortgage officer reminded us twice that it was a stretch. We are a good risk, I said, and we were. Frank paid that mortgage off in 2019. He died in 2021, 2 years after. I have made 2 cups of coffee every morning since, and then I drink one and pour the other down the drain, and I haven't figured out how to stop doing that yet. Welcome to Strong Mom Stories, where the women they wrote off get to finish their own sentences. Drop a comment and subscribe before we go any further, because this one gets specific. The house is at 4821 West Emerson Court in a subdivision called Copper Ridge. 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, a covered back patio, and a yard that backs up to a greenbelt. Frank planted a pecan tree out there in October of 2001 on a Tuesday on his day off, which was something he'd been threatening to do since we moved in. Pecan trees take 7 to 10 years to produce. Frank knew that. He planted it anyway. He said, "I'll be here when it's ready." He was. The tree started dropping nuts in the fall of 2009. We sat on the patio that October with a bowl between us and cracked them by hand, and Frank said, "I told you," and I said, "You told me," and that was one of the better evenings of our marriage. He died on March 4th, 2021. He was 66. The tree is still out there. It dropped more nuts last October than any year I can remember. People ask what I did before I retired, and I usually say legal work and leave it there, because the second you say the word paralegal, people hear secretary and move on. What I actually did for 26 years was sit at a desk at a real estate law firm on Price Road in Scottsdale and read trust documents, deeds, living trusts, estate plans, quitclaim deeds, the documents underneath other documents that explain what everything means, who it belongs to, and under what conditions. I drafted them, I filed them, I tracked them. I explained them to clients who hadn't read them and to attorneys who were too busy to remember what was in them. I retired in January of 2023. I want you to remember what I did for 26 years. It matters, not for the reason you're thinking. My daughter is 41. She married her husband in 2012. He is 45, works in commercial insurance, and has a way of carrying a conversation that makes you feel like a line item on an agenda. He is not a bad man. He is a thorough one. And thorough men who decide something should happen have a way of making it happen before you've had time to say the word no out loud. In February, my daughter came over with a bakery box and a folder. She set them both on the kitchen table. I put the kettle on. She didn't open the folder right away. She asked about my knee first. She asked about Carla next door. She asked whether I'd been sleeping. And then she slid the folder across the table in my direction with both hands, which is a gesture that tells you everything you need to know about what's inside. Palo Verde Gardens, a senior living community in Mesa, full-color brochure, a swimming pool with a canvas awning, a woman in a wide-brimmed hat tending container tomatoes, studios with a kitchenette starting at $3,800 a month. My daughter said she and her husband had been talking. She said the house was a lot for one person. She said the yard was a concern. She said, "I'd seemed tired lately." Then she mentioned a community consultant named Jeff who specialized in helping families navigate transitions like this. Transitions like this. She did not say, "We want to sell your house." She said, "We want to help you transition." I asked her when they had started talking about this. She looked at the brochure cover and said, "A while." That's a word that means long enough that it's already decided. I poured the water and let it steep, and I asked one more question. I asked what Jeff had said about the house. She said Jeff had run some comps. She said the market in Chandler was moving. She said if we waited, we'd lose momentum. I noticed that word. I filed it the way I have filed things my entire career. Then she said her husband had already spoken to a real estate agent. The agent had done a walkthrough. I hadn't been home for that walkthrough. I'd been at physical therapy on a Tuesday morning. The agent had been in my house, in my kitchen, in my backyard. He'd done this before my daughter asked me a single question, which told me exactly where I stood in the order of operations. Not at the beginning, not even at the end. Somewhere off to the side, in a column labeled Inform. I didn't argue. I asked if she wanted tea. She said she had to get going. She left the Palo Verde Gardens folder on my table. Here is where I need to be fair to my daughter, because this story has a shape that makes her easy to cast as a villain, and she isn't one. Her husband's business had a rough year in 2023. A commercial property investment went sideways. They covered it with private debt, the kind with interest rates that don't negotiate. By last spring, they were carrying somewhere around $160,000 in loans that were not getting smaller. My house appraised at $680,000. In their arithmetic, that was a solution. Somewhere along the way, I think my daughter convinced herself it was also a kindness. That's the part I've thought about the most. Not the money, the kindness. She built an entire story in which this was the right thing, the loving thing, the thing a good daughter does for a mother who seems tired. By the time she sat down across from me with that bakery box, the story was already finished. I was the last one to hear it, because I was the only one who hadn't agreed to it yet. If you've ever been the last person in the room to find out what the room already decided about you, you understand when I say that the word yes was never available in that conversation. Neither was no. The only word with any room left in it was fine. I did not say fine. I said I'd think about it. Now let me tell you why I didn't just say no in February and be done with it. Because I know that is exactly what you're asking right now, and I'm going to answer it early, because you deserve the real answer and not the version that makes me look cleverer than I was. 2 reasons. The first has a name. Her name is Ellen. She lives 2 streets over, and she is 72 now. In 2022, her son decided she was no longer capable of managing her own finances, based on one afternoon when she wrote the wrong check for the wrong bill. She disagreed with him. She said so loudly, he did not believe her. 3 months later, she was facing a petition for conservatorship of the person and estate filed in Maricopa County Superior Court. The supporting declaration included a paragraph about that afternoon. The words it used were confused, resistant to assistance, and showed signs of cognitive decline. She won. She kept her accounts. She also stopped going to the Thursday morning walking group. She doesn't have anyone over for dinner anymore. The thing in her that used to be loud went quiet and didn't come back. When my daughter slid that folder across my kitchen table, I thought about Ellen before the tea had even steeped. I called an elder law attorney the next morning. She practices on Scottsdale Road, 63 years old, no nonsense, bills in 6-minute increments. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, which is rarer than it should be. Then she said something I have repeated to myself nearly every day since. If you confront this at your kitchen table, you lose. Not because you're wrong, because the kitchen is their room. Anything you say there becomes evidence about your state of mind. You need to let this move to a room where what matters isn't what you say, it's what's already written down. I said, I know exactly the room she meant. She said, I thought you might. That's reason 1. Reason 2 is smaller and colder, and I'd rather not say it out loud, but this is the whole story, so here it is. I was waiting for my daughter to stop. I woke up every morning in those 9 weeks and I thought, today is the day she pulls into my driveway and says, Mom, we went too far. That's all it would have taken. 1 sentence at my door, and I would have handed her a cup of coffee, and the whole thing would have been over, and I would have gone to my grave saying, my daughter had a hard year. That is the real reason I let it go as far as it did. Not strategy, hope. The agent put a lockbox on my front door on a Monday in March. He is 48 years old, and he has a specialty he calls senior placement real estate, which is a phrase with a business card and a website and a sincere belief that families decide and owners cope. He shook my hand at the door, called me Mrs. Alderman, asked to walk the property, spent 20 minutes in my house taking photos on his phone, and never once asked me a question that required an actual answer. At the door on his way out, he said, "This is much easier when you're not home for the showings." Easier. Everything they arranged, that spring they arranged to make something easier, never specified what or for whom. I went out to the garage that evening and stood there for a while. Frank's tools are still on the pegboard where he left them. 2 levels, a set of screwdrivers, a mallet, a pry bar. The garage still smells like sawdust and motor oil from the years he spent restoring an old Jeep in there after he retired. He never fully finished it. It was always more about the evenings than the vehicle. I didn't do anything dramatic in that garage. I just stood there, and I thought about how long that lockbox was going to knock against my front door before someone checked what I already knew. I already knew because of what happened in the summer of 2022. I'll tell you about that in a minute. Not yet. The order matters. The photographer came on Thursday. He brought a wide-angle lens and moved my dining room chairs without asking, which is apparently standard. The stager came 2 days after. She was professional and fast, and she had opinions about every room, which I understood, right up until she walked out the back door and stood in the yard and pointed at the pecan tree. "That's going to be a problem for the furniture staging," she said. "A pecan tree's root system spreads wide." She wanted to install a temporary platform deck over the far end of the yard, which would have covered the roots on the east side and likely killed the tree within a season. I said no, the tree stays as it is. She made a note on her clipboard without arguing and moved to the next room. I stood at the back door and looked at that tree for a long moment before I followed her. Frank planted it in the wrong spot, by the way, too close to the fence line. He knew it when he did it. He said he'd move it once it got established, and then it got established, and he didn't want to disturb it. Every year it grows 6 inches further toward the neighbor's yard than it should. They have never once complained. I think they like the shade. The open house was a Saturday in late March. The agent texted me the night before. Said buyers feel uncomfortable when the owner is present. Said it would go better if I wasn't there. He sent a thumbs-up emoji at the end, which is a punctuation mark I associate with people who stopped listening 3 sentences back. So Saturday morning, I put on a decent blouse and drove to the coffee shop on Arizona Avenue and sat at a corner table with a book I didn't read for 3 hours. When I got home, there was a realtor's business card sitting on my kitchen counter. Inside my house, left there like a receipt. My neighbor Carla. She's 67. We've exchanged casseroles for 15 years. Came over that evening with a pan of enchiladas. She held my arms at the door and looked at my face the way you look at someone after bad news. She said, "You just say the word, honey, whatever you need." She didn't finish the sentence. I already knew how it ended. The following week, the woman on the corner asked me whether I was excited about the move. A man across the street said his mother had loved a senior community in Tempe. Had I looked at those? Nobody on that street asked me what I wanted. They asked each other. Then, they asked me things that came with answers already built in. By the end of March, I had become, on my own street, in the house I had lived in since 1998, a situation that was being handled. That is the part that actually costs something. Not the sign in the yard. The pronoun. The being managed. The way a person can become a problem in the middle of their own life without ever being consulted. Stay with me. It gets specific from here. If any of this is hitting close to home, take a second, hit subscribe, and tell me in the comments what they decided about you without asking. My granddaughter, she's 22, finishing her last semester at ASU, found out through Instagram. Her mother had posted a photo of the front yard with the sale sign and the caption "Exciting changes ahead" for Grandma and 3 sun emojis. She called me inside of an hour. She said, "Grandma, what is going on?" I told her. She was quiet for 4 seconds. Then she said, "I'm coming over tonight." She showed up with 2 coffees and sat on the patio steps near the pecan tree for most of an hour, while I told her the rest of it. When I finished, she looked at me and said, "Okay, so what are we going to do?" I said, "I'm going to let this get all the way to the end." She looked at me the way 22-year-olds almost never look at anybody, steadily for a full beat. Then she said, "Okay, but I want to be there when it does." I said, "I know you do." I said, "If you show up and make a scene, this becomes a story about a family fighting, and everyone in that room will pick the version that's easiest to believe about a 64-year-old woman. Let me handle it the way it needs to be handled." She said, "Which is how?" I said quietly, "In a room where what matters is what's written down." She brought me coffee every single week from that point until closing day. Never missed once. She has never in her life referred to me in the third person while I was standing in the room. Now, the summer of 2022. In April of that year, my son-in-law called and asked whether I'd considered pulling some equity out of the house. He said rates were going to climb. He said it was a good time to access liquidity. He already had a lender's name ready, which told me he hadn't called to ask me. He'd called to walk me toward a conclusion he'd already reached. I said no. I said I didn't carry debt and didn't plan to start. He said, "That's your call." The way he said it made clear he didn't think it was. 8 weeks later, I received a letter from a bank in Scottsdale, addressed to me at my home address. It thanked me for my recent application and informed me that the requested home equity line of credit in the amount of $90,000 could not be approved at this time due to a title matter. I had not applied for anything. He had used the durable power of attorney I'd signed in April of 2020 when I had my knee replaced and needed someone to handle my affairs during 4 weeks of recovery. I had named my daughter as my agent. She signed the application. Her husband filled out the paperwork. The application died because the lender's underwriting team ran a title search and something came back on it, and they sent a 2-line email saying they were unable to proceed due to a title issue. My son-in-law mentioned this to me later, annoyed. He said the bank was difficult. He said there might be something in my credit file from when Frank was sick. He did not ask what the title matter was. Not once. Not in 3 years. He walked past a closed door and never once wondered what was behind it. The door had been there since November of 2003. That is when Frank and I created our revocable living trust. We did it because Frank had watched his father spend 14 months in Arizona probate court after Frank's mother died, and Frank said, "Not us," and he meant it. The trust held the house. When Frank died in 2021, the trust became irrevocable by its own terms. And the trust document, 7 pages, recorded with Maricopa County in November of 2003, document number 2003-0447821, contained one clause in the property disposition section that my son-in-law had never read. Life estate reserved unto Joyce Alderman for the term of her natural life. All right, title and interest shall vest in the remainder beneficiary only upon her death. I am the life tenant. The house cannot be sold while I am living without my signature. That is not sentiment. That is a recorded legal fact that has been sitting in the Maricopa County Recorder's Public Index for 22 years. After the failed loan application, I drove downtown to the recorder's office on Washington Street, took a number, sat in a plastic chair, and waited for the board to call it. Asked a clerk to help me search the grantor-grantee index under my name and under my son-in-law's name. Then I paid for certified copies of 2 documents. The first was the trust instrument, confirmation that the life estate clause was there, recorded, public, inarguable. The second was a document I executed and recorded that same afternoon, a revocation of durable power of attorney, document number 2022-0631107. Recorded August 9, 2022, at 9:14 in the morning. 3 paragraphs. It states that the power of attorney I executed in April of 2020, naming my daughter as my agent, is revoked in its entirety. It states that any person dealing with the property described herein is on notice. I mailed certified copies to both of them that same afternoon. Return receipt requested on both envelopes. The green cards came back 10 days later. My daughter's card had her signature on it. My son-in-law's card had a large looping signature that was not his handwriting. Someone else had signed for his mail. I put both cards in a manila envelope in my file cabinet with the certified copies behind them. I went to bed. Neither of them ever mentioned the letter. Not in 2022, not in 2023, not during the 9 weeks of that spring when they were arranging showings and sending photographers into my home. My son-in-law had a piece of paper in his pocket that he believed gave him authority over this house. He had never once checked whether that paper was still valid. The public record is searchable by anyone with a parking space and 15 minutes. He never searched it. You cannot take something from someone you've been paying attention to. On a Tuesday in May, the mail came at 11:30. Among the grocery circulars and an electricity bill, there was a white envelope from Sonoran Land Title Company, addressed to the trustee of the Alderman Family Trust at 4821 West Emerson Court. Preliminary Title Report. 11 pages. I read the exceptions section 3 times before I fully understood what I was looking at. Exception number 8. A life estate interest reserved unto Joyce Ann Alderman per instrument 2003-047821, recorded November 14, 2003, Maricopa County Recorder. That preliminary report had gone out by email on the day it was issued, to my son-in-law as seller of record, to the listing agent, to the buyer's agent, to the buyers, to the lender. 6 people received that document before I did. I have spent 26 years watching people not read preliminary title reports. Buyers skim them. Agents forward them. Nobody reads the exceptions because the exceptions are where the technical language lives, and everybody assumes somebody else handled the technical language. Not one person in that transaction had opened that attachment. I sat on the arm of the couch and I read Exception 8 one more time. And then I laughed once, quietly, in an empty living room. Because that exception had been there for 22 years, and it was going to end this entire thing in a room I had never set foot in. They accepted an offer on April 28th, listed at $645, accepted at $660. Buyers were a couple relocating from out of state. Escrow opened at Sonoran Land Title on Camelback Road in Scottsdale. Escrow number SLT 2026-44-SWAN. Closing set for Friday, May 22nd. My son-in-law called that evening. He was warm in the way people are warm when something is going according to plan. He said they'd done well on price. He said he'd handle all the paperwork. He said he'd let me know if they needed me to sign anything at the end. Sign anything, as though it were an afterthought, a formality. He said the whole thing would take 15 minutes. On Wednesday the 20th, my phone rang at 9 in the morning. The escrow officer at Sonoran Land Title, professional and efficient, apologetic about the short notice. She said their underwriter had flagged the trust instrument and needed the trustee of record present in person for the signing. She confirmed the address on Camelback. My son-in-law called 40 minutes later. He had already spoken with her. He said it was routine trust paperwork. He said to bring my ID. He said it was nothing. 20 minutes maximum. 20 minutes. He had reduced the last legal act involving this house to 20 minutes and called it nothing. Thursday evening, I took out the navy blazer I'd worn to Frank's memorial and I ironed it. I set out my good flats. I put my driver's license in the outside pocket of my purse so I wouldn't be fumbling at a table full of people. I put the manila envelope in my bag, the certified copies, both green cards. If you have ever ironed a blazer for a room where someone expected you to be furniture, you know what you're doing at that ironing board. I called my attorney that evening. She said the title company would run a date-down search. Friday morning. A final pull of the chain of title right up to that day, standard practice on every transaction in every county in this country. She said the exception from the preliminary report was still open. Nobody had asked her to clear it. Nobody had called her at all. She asked if I wanted her there. I said no. I said if my attorney walks in, this becomes a legal dispute. If I walk in alone with my license and my purse, it's just a woman sitting at a table while a title company does its job. The record doesn't need an advocate. That is the entire point of a record. She said, don't explain anything. Don't help them. They'll get there on their own. I said, I have no intention of helping. I slept about 3 hours. Friday, May 22nd, 10 in the morning. Sonoran land title is on the 4th floor of a building on Camelback Road. The conference room has a rectangular table that seats 8, a credenza with bottled water and a fruit bowl, and a box of tissues in the center because every title company puts tissues in the center. They know. I arrived at 9:50. I sat at the far end of the table and set my purse in my lap. The buyers came in first. A young couple, polite, nervous in the way people are nervous at the beginning of something large. She had a folder with a picture of their golden retriever tucked under the clip. They introduced themselves. I told them it was nice to meet them, and I meant it, and that was the hardest part of the morning. The listing agent came in with paper-clipped copies of everything. My son-in-law came in on his phone and ended the call at the door. He put a hand on the back of my chair, not on me, on the chair, and said, "You doing okay, Mom?" I said, "Just fine." The escrow officer came in with the document stack and a rolling cart and started through IDs the way they always do, efficiently. And then she paused at her screen. She said she'd sent the trust instrument to the title officer that morning for a review and needed a few minutes. The title officer came in 2 minutes later. She looked about 30, hair pinned back, a pen behind one ear, a stack of printouts with a red flag on page 2. She apologized for the delay. She said she needed to walk through the chain of title before anyone signed anything. My son-in-law said, "Is there a problem?" She said, "There's a history I want to be clear on first." She read it the way people who know what they're doing always read things. Like a list. No performance. 1998 purchase, Frank and Joyce Alderman, community property. 2003 transfer into revocable living trust. 2021 affidavit of death of co-trustee, which converted the trust to irrevocable status by its own terms. Then she turned to the page with the red flag. And she read the life estate clause out loud in a beige conference room on Camelback Road in Scottsdale, Arizona. Life estate reserved unto Joyce Ann Alderman for the term of her natural life. All right, title and interest in the property shall vest in the remainder beneficiary only upon her death. Nobody moved. My son-in-law said, "That's a standard trust clause. It doesn't affect the sale." She said, respectfully, "It does. A life tenant must join any conveyance of the property. Without Mrs. Alderman's voluntary signature on the deed, I can't issue a title policy. Without a policy, the lender won't fund. Without funding, there is no sale." My son-in-law's voice went up. He said the house had been in the family trust for over 20 years. He said his wife held a durable power of attorney. The title officer said, "We received that document. Our examiner ran both names through the grantor-grantee index this morning as part of the date down." She set a second page on the table. "There is a revocation of that instrument on record. Document 2022-0631107, recorded August 9th, 2022, at 9:14 in the morning. The power of attorney submitted today was revoked 3 years ago." My son-in-law said that wasn't possible. She said, "It's been public for 3 years. It's indexed under both names. Anyone with access to the recorder's public terminal could have found it." Then, she said the sentence that put the listing agreement in the ground. Which means the seller's representative has had no legal authority to act for Mrs. Alderman since August of 2022. That includes the listing agreement executed in March of this year. My son-in-law pushed back from the table. He said my name. He said, "Did you do this?" I opened my purse. I took out the manila envelope and removed the 2 green certified mail return receipt cards and set them in the center of the table near the tissue box. I said, "I mailed certified copies to both of you in August of 2022. Return receipt requested." He looked at the card with the looped signature that wasn't his. My daughter made a sound I hadn't heard from her before. The listing agent tried. He said something about families making these decisions together. About how he'd been through this many times, and it always worked out. The title officer said, "With respect, title doesn't ask the family. Title asks the record." Every face in that room turned toward me. 8 people. I was the only one who hadn't moved from my chair. I stood up once. I looked at my son-in-law and I said, 4 words, "I'm not signing this." Then I said the rest of it. I said, "The house is in the trust for you. It has always been in the trust for you. You get it the day I'm finished with it. Not 1 hour before." Then I said good morning to the buyers and I told them I was truly sorry, and I meant every word of it. They had done nothing wrong. They had a dog who needed a yard, and they deserved better than this table on this morning. I picked up my license and my envelope. I walked out of that conference room at 10:57, down the hall, into the elevator, and out into the May heat on Camelback Road. I sat in my car for 5 minutes before I could get the key into the ignition. Escrow SLT 2026-4417 was terminated that afternoon. The following week, I mailed the buyers a cashier's check for their appraisal and inspection costs, which together came to $912, and a handwritten note that said, "None of this was your fault and I hope you find somewhere wonderful." She wrote back a week later, said they'd found a place 2 streets over. Said the dog had already claimed the backyard. I was genuinely glad. I filed a complaint with the Arizona Department of Real Estate regarding the listing agent. Not for missing the trust clause in conversation, but for proceeding with a listing under a power of attorney without verifying its current validity in the county's public record. His brokerage's senior transitions page came down within the month. I filed a report with Adult Protective Services on May 28th. A caseworker came to my house and sat at my kitchen table for 40 minutes and read through the entire envelope. She said, "Most of the time, what we get is a phone call and a feeling. What you've given me is documentation. There is a file now. It is not empty." I changed the locks on June 2nd. I recorded an updated declaration of homestead with Maricopa County that same week. I signed a new durable power of attorney, naming my granddaughter as my agent. I did not touch the remainder interest in the trust. Frank signed that document with a pen he'd borrowed from the attorney's receptionist at a table on Price Road in Scottsdale. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he knew exactly who that house was for. I am not going to rewrite my husband's last wish because his son-in-law had a difficult year. My granddaughter moved her Tuesday coffee visits to Wednesday. She sits on the patio steps near the pecan tree. Last week, she asked me to show her how to crack them by hand the way Frank and I used to. So we did. She was good at it after about 3 tries. My daughter and I speak, not the way we used to. There is a sentence she said in that conference room. She said it to the room, not to me, and I can still hear it exactly, the way it sat in the air. I think about it sometimes when I'm watering the garden in the morning. I'm not sure yet what to do with it. Maybe nothing. Sometimes nothing is the right size for a thing. My son-in-law has not called. The pecan tree dropped its first nuts of the season 3 weeks ago. I sat on the patio with a bowl the way Frank and I used to, and the October light came across the greenbelt at the angle it always does in the fall, and I sat there for a long time with my hands in the bowl. People keep telling me I outmaneuvered my family. I want to be clear that I did not. There was no strategy beyond knowing what I had signed and knowing where to find it. Any of them could have walked into the Maricopa County Recorder's office on any Tuesday for 3 years and found exactly what that title officer found in one morning. The public record does not hide. It sits there, patient, indexed, waiting for someone to look. So here is the one thing I'll leave you with. If there is a deed to your home with your name on it, go find out what it actually says. Not what you remember, not what someone told you, what it says. Pull a certified copy from your county recorder this week. It costs less than a tank of gas and 15 minutes of your morning, and it will tell you more about what you own than every conversation you've ever had about it. Because what's written down is the only version that matters when someone else decides they already know what's best for you. That's my story. I'm still here. I'm still home. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and go check your record.